Federal contracting. Too complicated? Too risky? Payments too slow? Think again. My guests, Doug and Sean Reitmeyer, have landed over $1 billion in federal projects. And here's the kicker. You can start with nothing more than a SAM registration at sam.gov. Federal work is fair, full of opportunity, and unlike private jobs and jobs with states and municipalities, you actually get paid fast, 14 to 30 days by law. And so in this episode, you'll hear how to break into the market, avoid rookie mistakes, and tap into one of the most overlooked gold mines in construction. Let's dive right in. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Doug, Sean, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you guys are experts in a particular niche of construction, federal contracting. And so I want to kick it off. What's the very first step a construction company should take if they want to get into federal contracting?
So I get asked this question, seems like 3 times a day. And the answer is what's called a SAM registration. It stands for System for Award Management. Back in the old days when my dad was coming up in this business and I was coming up as a young man, it used to be CCR, Central Contractors Registration. Some people think that you have to have a license to become a federal contractor. And often you'll hear Doug or I say, we're a national federal contractor. Turns out that's a made-up term. Really, all it takes to be a federal contractor is a SAM registration. You just register your entity. It can be a sole proprietorship, a corporation, an LLC. Once you're registered with the federal government, you can be awarded federal contracts. And so whether you sell cake mix to the Navy so they can make cakes on ships, or you sell bullets or aircraft parts, or even construction goods and services, the first step is always register your entity with the federal government at sam.gov.
Okay, so having registered, you said you don't need a license. So if you're going to bid on a federal construction project, do you need a construction license?
So the way that I teach this is that if you and I were walking through a neighborhood and I pointed up at the top of a power pole and said, that's a transformer, would you know what I'm referring to?
Me personally?
Yes.
Not really.
Okay, well, a transformer is what takes the line voltage from the power company and transforms it to a lower voltage for use at houses or businesses. And what state are you in?
California.
So I'm going to give you 3 scenarios. Scenario number 1, the transformer shall be replaced by a licensed electrician in the state of California. Well, in that case, you would have to hire a licensed electrician to replace that transformer that is in the state of California. But it has nothing to do with the company that got the job. All they needed was a SAM registration. So scenario number 2, the transformer shall be replaced by a licensed electrician. Well, now any licensed electrician from any state can go into California and replace that transformer. Understand this is federal eminent domain property. There's no such thing as a state inspector going onto a federal job. Again, this has nothing to do with the company that got the job. All they needed was a SAM registration. Scenario number 3, the transformer shall be replaced. Now that literally means that you and I can go out there on a Saturday and replace the transformer. And now, while my dad has had a couple of different licenses over his career, I've never had a license of any kind other than a driver's license. But the entities that I've worked with, for, or owned always had a registration with the federal government to be awarded federal contract. You just have to read the requirements and comply with them.
Excellent. So how do you figure out if federal contracting is even a good fit for your business, and specifically a construction business?
So the federal government procures goods and services in accordance with a rule book. And that rule book is called the Federal Acquisition Regulations. And to me, when you're talking about a new contractor coming into the federal government, probably the best place to start is Federal Acquisition Regulation 13.004. In fact, in some of my Zooms over on my GCExperts YouTube channel, you'll hear me refer people and make them read that federal acquisition regulation out loud. And then I explain it to them in everyday conversation. I break it down because when you Google Federal Acquisition Regulation 13.004, first thing it states as a title is legal effect of a quotation, implying that there's something legal associated with a quote. In most contractors, when they give out quotes, there's nothing legal associated with them.
Interesting.
And when you go in and you read the legal effect of a quotation, the first thing it says is that a quote is not an offer and consequently cannot be turned into a contract. Now, that's different. And the first time you hear that, it doesn't quite make sense. What do you mean a quote is not a contract? In the real world, if a contractor goes out and gives a quote to somebody and signs that quote, hands it over to that guy, and he signs it, you have a contract. But in federal government construction, in accordance with this particular federal acquisition regulation, when you turn in a quote to the federal government, they cannot, by law, turn it into a contract, thereby meaning that if every quote you turned in cannot be turned into a contract, what's your risk for turning in a quote? It goes on to say that even if a contracting officer or procurement official takes your quote and turns it into a contract, don't worry about it. It's still not a contract. Thereby, what they're saying in the second sentence is that we're the federal government. We understand that people make mistakes. And even though it says in sentence number 1 that you can't turn it into a contract, sentence number 2 says, hey, someday if somebody does, don't worry about it. It's still not a contract. Then it goes on to say that it becomes a contract when the supplier accepts the offer. Well, who's the supplier of the quote? Me, the contractor. I'm the supplier. What does that mean? I accept the quote. So how that works in real life is, let's say the National Park Service wants to build a 200 square foot tiny house for a couple of their park rangers over the winter. They put it out for a solicitation, and me, the federal contractor, I come across it and I turn in a bid, $100,000 to build a 200 square foot tiny house. So the government gets that quote, but they can't turn it into a contract. So what they have to do is they have to approach me with my quote. And I know this sounds weird to probably your listeners, but how it actually works is they contact me and they say, hey, we got your quote for $100,000 to build this 200 square foot tiny house. Would you please accept this offer of us to go build this 200 square foot tiny house for $100,000? When they do that, when they contact you to get you to accept the offer, you have 4 options. Number 1, you can accept. Hey, I'll take the deal. Number 2, you can withdraw. Sorry, we're too busy. Go to the next guy. Number 3, you can negotiate. Hey, I know I turned in my bid for $100,000. What would happen if I needed to change my bid to $130,000? Or 4, you can stall for more time.
Okay, so let me just interrupt you, Sean. You bring up something interesting there with those 4 options, specifically the one negotiate, right? Because a lot of people, they probably think of federal contracting as a hard bid environment. And, you know, when the hard bid environment, when the bid goes out, you bid on the bid and the low number wins. Is that not the case with federal contracting, or am I missing something there?
Let me step in here. When I started in the business, 80% of contracts were called IFB, invitation for bid. And that was a hard number. Man, if you screwed up that number, it was potentially problematic, right? Now, there is a mistaken bid clause in the federal regulations where if you made a legitimate mistake and you can prove it and swear by it, you can get out of, or you can request a withdrawal prior to award saying I made a mistake, right? And about 20% of the projects were requests for quotes, what Sean's talking about. Today's environment is really pretty much reversed. It's gone to about 80% RFP and 20%, or even maybe 10 to 15% invitation for bid, what you're used to thinking of hard bid. Hey, you go down City Hall and you bid that federal courthouse renovation. You got a bid bond that they're going to pull on you if you don't.
That's monsters under the bed stuff. Really, what you're talking about, Eric, is on request for quotes, you have these 4 options and you can negotiate. And what's happened is the federal government has recognized over time that often the lowest bid is not the best value. And so they implement something called lowest price technically acceptable. And during that process, they can actually choose the highest bidder. And there were times in our career where they chose us, even though we were the highest bidder. But as far as negotiate, yes, you can accept, withdraw, negotiate, and stall. And so the question becomes, if one of your options is to withdraw every bid you ever turned in, what is your risk for turning in a bid?
Sure. Yep, I get that.
Well, the answer is 0.
Yeah. All right, quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is what I want you to do. Go to Amazon, search for the book, read all of the 5-star reviews, because there's a ton of them. over 50 to be precise. And the reason I want you to read them is because real people wrote those reviews who've actually read the book. And it'll give you an idea of why you should go and buy a copy right now on Amazon. And here's the deal. If you purchase 10 or more copies for your company, and then send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, I'll come in via Zoom and do a 1-hour Q&A and a bonus training session with your team at no charge. I normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. And again, for you, I'll do it at no charge if you buy 10 or more copies of my book. And the reason you should buy it is all in the title. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're in the construction industry, this book is for you. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Audible in the audio version as well, narrated by yours truly. And I know you'll really enjoy it. So go out and get the book. And now back to the interview. Okay, so then for a beginner, they're just thinking about getting into federal contracting, maybe exploring it. Should they go after small contracts first? Or because, a lot of people who are listening to the show, they're large contractors, right? And so they're going to be going, they're not there going after a $100,000 tiny house. They're going after maybe a $100 million project in the work that they do. So should they start small, or should they just go for it and go for the big contracts that fit with them?
You start small and you build up a record with the federal government. You start with under $150,000 jobs. Now, that's not a hard, fast rule. That's for the typical, small-time contractor that's coming into the federal sector.
Yep.
One of our clients does $100 million in roofs a year. So, his first federal contract was a $5 million roof. And he had no problems getting that because he had a track record of $100 million a year in roofing. But for most people, I just talked to a couple of my clients. Mark called me. He got a $68,000 job to replace some siding. It's going to end up costing him $40,000. That was his first job. Ryan Jacobson called me. He got a couple of mini split air conditioning systems for $58,000, and it's going to end up costing him $35,000. Those are the smaller side contracts, and those are typically the easiest to get when you're new.
Okay, but what are one or two strategies to stand out when you're bidding, especially if you've never done federal work before?
Well, when you say stand out, you're not necessarily going to stand out. You're going to be in a pool of, typically, the government's going to be collecting these responses to their solicitation request, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it be an invitation for bid or an RFP. And they're just going to take a look at first thing they're going to look at is price, right? And then they're going to typically go to the low bid, see if it's qualified, make sure that they're in the SAM registration. If it requires a bid bond, that there's a bid bond there. Interestingly, by the way, just last week this happened. We were not the low bidder on a project with one of my mastermind group guys. We bid like $711,000 to replace 2 small chillers at a prison in West Virginia. And they're out of Kentucky. I'm in Austin, Texas. So we worked together on this. The low bid was $707,000. So we were higher than him by $4,000. However, what was unique was a subcontractor called us a few days later and said, hey, they're not going to give that contract to the low bidder. So I called up Andy, the guy I'm working with, and I said, why do you think that is? He said, here's what I think happened. The government required on that solicitation that you in advance give them a wet signature bid bond, right? Normally you can send them a copy of your bid bond and they'll just call and see if it's good. But they were saying, before you bid this thing, you send us, we want a wet copy of the bid bond in our hands, right? And so he had done that, and he had not only done it, but he'd sent an email saying, hey, I want to confirm you received our wet copy. Well, we believe that the low bidder didn't do that. He just sent in his copy like he normally does, and they rejected it, said it was non-responsive, right? So weird things can happen in government contracting, but it's being consistent and following the directions precisely.
Yeah.
And, on that project, we may end up making a couple $100,000, but it's just being consistent, be there every day.
That's
right?
great.
And
how quickly do you get paid on federal jobs compared to private sector work?
Remember, I was referring to the Federal Acquisition Regulations earlier.
Yeah.
Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 2, commonly referred to as the Federal Prompt Payment Act, says in part that the contractor shall be paid monthly or more often as deemed necessary by the contracting officer on a percentage complete basis. meaning that if you're 20% complete, you get 20% of your money. It goes on to say that on a partial pay request, the contractor shall be paid within 14 days, and that on a final pay request, the contractor shall be paid within 30 days. So one of the methodologies that we developed over time was even when we're 100% complete, we bill the job 98% complete. So we get our money in 14 days and then let the federal government take the 30 days to pay the additional 2%. But every once in a while, a contracting officer will come back and say, wait, you're 100% complete. Why aren't you billing this 100% complete? And the answer that we developed was, well, we've been in construction a long time, and we know that if there's going to be a warranty issue, it almost always happens within the first 30 days of when we leave. We just want to make sure the government's protected for that.
So to be clear then, the maximum time frame is 30 days for being paid?
It's under the Federal Prompt Payment Act. I love to teach from public sources. Just anybody who's listening, go Google that.
That's good. That's interesting, right? Because you'd be thinking with the government, you'd be waiting 90 days, 120 days, something like that. But
And that's often the case with state governments, county, local, city. But that's not the way it is with the feds.
That's interesting. Think about the last time you promoted someone into a leadership role and it failed. Why did it fail? I can tell you one reason. People know how to build projects, but they don't know how to build and lead teams of people. Construction comes with its challenges that only insiders truly understand. Generic leadership training doesn't cut it. You need a program to train your leaders built specifically for construction professionals led by an industry expert. And my online course, The Shift, is exactly that course. It has 5 modules. It'll teach your people how to control their calendars and reduce stress and embrace chaos and accomplish their critical tasks. It will teach them the 3 essential messages they have to communicate every day in order to motivate and lead their team effectively. It'll show them how to build and lead a high-performing team, give them a framework for running effective meetings so they'll be able to solve problems in less than an hour, and also give them a higher perspective on their leadership that will enable them to work on the business and on their teams and not get stuck in the weeds micromanaging. So go out to my website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, read all about the course, and then enroll yourself and your leaders in the course, and I guarantee that it will transform your leadership. If it does not, you take the whole course and you didn't get benefit from it, you just send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, and I will cheerfully refund you 100% of your money. I'm really confident this course will transform your leadership. So again, go out to the website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, learn more about the course, and start taking it today. What risks do people underestimate when they first get into federal contracting?
Go ahead.
You're dealing with a bureaucrat, no difference than, with a typical city, county, or state. I've done both private work and various public work prior to becoming a full-time national federal contractor. But just remembering that you're dealing with people. Yeah. And if you pay attention to the regulations, and don't get me wrong, sometimes people in the government will make mistakes, but there's provisions. For example, the only court in the United States of America where a construction company executive, president or vice president, can represent his company is the Board of Contract Appeals. So the government, in their infinite wisdom, through this federal acquisition regulation system, says that if you have a problem with a contracting officer and you're not getting paid what you think you are, or they're not writing a modification, or they're using the submittal review process to try and get a no-cost modification. Now, what I mean by that is you turn in the submittal and they go, oh, we don't like that. Well, because we want train, we don't want carrier chillers, right? So we're not going to approve the carrier. But the contract says, or equal to, right? They didn't do a sole source justification, so I get to use carrier. But they just keep rejecting it because they want something else, right? And so you can go to the contracting officer and say, look, I need you to make a final decision on this. Now, if the contracting officer rules against you, you may have to proceed, but if you have an increased cost, you can appeal that to the Board of Contract Appeals and actually get a judge to rule on it. And you don't need a lawyer to do it.
So what should contractors know about managing cash flow and financing when dealing with federal projects?
If you're going to get paid every 30 days, most contractors accept the fact that you're not going to get money up front. Now, a little residential guy that says, hey, you want a new air conditioner? It's $8,000. You give me $4,000. I'll pay the other $4,000 when you're done. Right? Well, obviously, with taxpayer money, they're not going to give you taxpayer money. They're going to pay you percent complete every month based on what your contract is, your schedule of values, which you agreed to at the pre-construction conference. Here's the breakdown. Here's the percent. When we're at 50%, we're going to give you a bill for 50%. We're going to expect to get paid in 30 days. So if you got a subcontractor that's doing that and you promise him, you're going to get paid. When I get paid, you're going to get paid. First of all, under the Prompt Payment Act, it's a federal crime if you don't pay them within 7 days. But what I teach my guys, and what I always did, was if I get paid, you're going to get paid the same day. If I know you need the money and I know I'm getting paid, I might pay you ahead just because I've got positive cash flow.
For the most part, federal government construction is a cash flow positive business. And it's not that it's impossible to get the federal government to finance something. Remember, I was talking about the federal acquisition regulations. If you go to FAR 52.232-12, it actually talks about how to get advance payments. The problem is if you go through and you read those provisions, one of them is you have to open up your books to the federal government. So we've never actually done that, tried to get advance payments, in part because who wants to show their books to the federal government? But typically when that question comes up to me, it's somebody asking because they're usually used to the idea that, hey, I need to get some money down in order to finance this job, or, maybe he doesn't even have the money to go get the equipment and that kind of stuff. And I just say, listen, that might mean that you and I can't do business on this job, and I'll just have to go find a different subcontractor. But I'd like to keep you in my Rolodex and effort. And if another job comes up in this area that I'd like to work with you on. But typically that question is asked for two reasons. Either one, I really need the money, or two, I need to find out how hard it's going to be to get money out of you. And on federal contracts, you're protected two methodologies. One is what my father was referring to and what I've heard to earlier, the Federal Prompt Payment Act. And number two is federal contracts typically are bonded. The Federal Acquisition Regulation states in FAR 28.102 that federal contracts above $150,000 must be bonded, or payment performance protection. There's 5 types of payment performance protection. Typically, when people refer to that, they're referring to bonds. But under $150,000, there is no law requiring a bond. It's at the federal contracting officer or the procurement official's discretion. Okay, so often you'll find bonding requirements on jobs under 150,000, but sometimes you won't.
Okay, interesting. So once you win your first federal contract, what should you do to build credibility and get the next one?
Just do an excellent job.
Yeah,
do a great job.
Look, one of the things that I teach in the workshop is if you're making a lot of money on a job, what's your motivation? Because you got a customer who's giving you a lot of money and you're making a lot of profit. Your motivation becomes making that customer really happy, right? Because if I make this guy really happy, he'll give me a good reference and might even give me another job, right? So I tell everybody the stupidest words I ever heard is a guy telling me I bid it to win it. What that tells me is he's trying to cut his overhead, cut every expense he can, figure out what corner's in. And then if he gets the job, what's his motivation? Try and save more money, right? If you're making a lot of money on the job, I never bid it to win it. I bid it to make a lot of money, because if I'm making a lot of money, I can afford to make that customer really happy, even if he screws up.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you had to break federal contracting success down into 3 simple rules, what would those be?
So 3 simple rules for federal contracting. Number 1, don't take a job unless you know you're going to be making money. In accordance with Federal Acquisition Regulation 13.004, don't accept the job unless you know for sure it's going to be making money. Number 2, being the son of a federal government contractor, I was raised in this business. When I was 15 years old, I backtalked my mom, and my dad had one of those big brick cell phones in 1986. She called him on that, and he said, put that kid on an airplane to Palm Springs, California. So I got shipped off within hours to Palm Springs, California. And within hours, I was in an attic insulating ductwork at 29 Palms Marine Corps Base out in California. So an introduction into the real world swiftly. Well, the reason I mention that is that I was brought up in this business, and as I became more responsible for things that were happening, every once in a while I'd take shortcuts because I was just a kid that was green behind the ears and just trying to make it in this world. And the number one rule, my dad would come in and quiz me on the requirements of a contract, what's in the plans and specifications. And a typical kid just trying to make his way through it, do as little work as possible. And my dad would stop everything. Are we allowed to curse on this podcast?
Sure.
Stop everything and read the fucking plans and specifications. And then he'd quiz me. And so I'd say number 2 is understand what you're getting into. Read the plans and specifications. Okay. And then number 3, I think one of the most incredible things about federal government construction over any other type of construction, and this is a two-parter, because one is federal construction is not perfect, but it's the most fair type of construction I've ever come across. And I know my dad has said that many times over the years, and I've come to truly believe that.
Why do you say it's the most fair?
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so let's talk about the transformer, changing out the transformer earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say the company name is AAA Electrical and you want to go after a concrete job. Well, you can have AAA. The name of your company doesn't matter in federal government construction. Nobody cares what your name is. When I say fair, nobody cares about your race. Nobody cares about what your political affiliation is. When I say fair, I mean it's performed by we the people. We have procurement officials that are trained on how to procure federal government construction goods and services. And I'm very aggressive, and my personality type is not buddy. I'm not the kind of guy that when you call me and say, hey, I didn't get this job, and it's okay, you'll get the next one. I'm the kind of guy that goes, no, you need to do A, B, C. I'm very argumentative, combative in conversation. I'm not a relationship guy. You're never going to hear from me, hey, how's your kids? Was your weekend good? That kind of personality doesn't jive well out in the real construction world, because in the real construction world, you're trying to talk somebody out of pulling money out of their pocket and giving it to you. That, by definition, means you need to have some kind of relationship and be a good guy and be a nice guy. I could never compete in that world. Okay, in federal government construction, be the personality that I am, because in federal government construction, when you achieve percent complete, go back to that federal acquisition regulation, the Prompt Payment Act. The Federal Prompt Payment Act says that the contractor shall be paid monthly or more often as deemed necessary by the contracting officer on a percentage complete basis. Okay, I'm 50% complete. Pay me. Doesn't matter how you ask for that money because you're entitled to it. Once you're entitled to it, it doesn't matter how you ask for it. Okay? It's literally somebody's job within the federal government to check a checkbox and go, hey, he's 50% complete. Okay, pay the guy 50%. That's the kind of world I can compete in on the merits of my capabilities rather than the relationships that I can create.
Yeah, let me emphasize it this way. Early in my career, when I got out of the Army in 1973, in my mind, I was unemployable. I was a college dropout. I had been drafted during the Vietnam War. I didn't know much. I knew electronics and I knew electrical. And I started fixing air conditioners because I knew physics. I'd been a physics major in college, so I could figure stuff out. And my brother and I got him. We started a little business, and we started putting in mobile home air conditioners for mobile home dealers as GIs were coming back from Vietnam around Fort Hood. And we could literally install 10 air conditioners a day in mobile homes. And we're making $50 on each one, equivalent to $500 a day. But in today's money, keep in mind, gasoline was 30 cents a gallon, but everything's about 10 times what it was in the early 70s.
That's cool.
So we were making the equivalent back then of $5,000 a day. We were blowing and going. And one mobile home dealer, he wouldn't pay me 20 grand deal, a whole truckload of air conditioners, and I couldn't get paid. So I filed a lawsuit against him and he filed bankruptcy. I didn't know enough that if I'd have been a good businessman and had knowledge or a mentor and filed a UCC1 form on every one of them, I would have still owned the air conditioner. I could have gone and picked them up. But he sold the title with the mobile home to the mortgage company and I couldn't even get it. So here was a 25-year-old kid, $20,000 in debt, which is equivalent to $200,000 in today's money, going to the bank and saying, I got to borrow the equivalent of 200 grand. I had a really good banker. He owned his own bank, Bernie Back, and he just looked at me and said, how are you going to pay me back? Well, I had been learning how to do federal contracts, And I said, I'm only going to do federal contracts. He said, why? I said, they're the only people I know when they run out of money, they just print more and they do it legally. He kind of laughed and he loaned me the money. Now, thinking back, this 25-year-old kid with one child, another one on the way, and this banker loans me in today's money $200,000 on the fact that I'm just going to do federal contracts. Well, as a result of his faith in me, I became the most aggressive SOB you ever met in your life at doing federal contracts. And for the next 30 years, I did 30 to 40 contracts every year. I worked in all 50 states, everything you can imagine. I went and got a master electrician's license, a master mechanical contractor's license, a universal Freon license when you had to do that. I was the guy that I would study the shit out of it. I'd take the tests, and be able to say, look, I know what I'm doing here, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. Well, tell us a little bit more, Sean and Doug, about how people can get in touch with you and learn more about how to get into federal contracting if that's something they'd like to do.
That's easy. You just go to GCExperts.com. That's GCExperts.com. And there's a little sign-in box. You can put your name and email address, and then my marketing team will start sending you information.
That's awesome.
Or you can just Google government construction experts, right?
Yeah.
And they'll come right up.
That's great. I know both of you guys are down there in Austin, Texas. What's the one restaurant you need to hit up if you're going to Austin?
Gosh, I guess it would be the Oasis. It's got the best view in Austin.
The Oasis.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, great. We're gonna search that one up and put the link in the show notes.
And the Steiner Ranch Steakhouse has a beautiful view and great steaks.
What's that called? Say it again.
Steiner, Steiner, Steiner Ranch Steakhouse.
Ooh, there you go. That sounds good.
It is. That's great. Excellent Texas food.
Beautiful, beautiful. Doug, Sean, thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, really appreciate it, Eric.
Thank you for listening to my interview with Sean and Doug. Feel free to go to GCExperts.com and check out their website, learn more about them. And also, if you're in Austin, the Oasis and Steiner Ranch Steakhouse. Links in the show notes. Give us a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. Share the podcast far and wide with everyone in your network, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.